services in their home, as well as how they would like to participate in their community. This model is a model that heavily emphasizes individuals having choices and also accepting the responsibilities that accompany these choices. Because, of course, there are responsibilities that people have to take care of once they decide to live independently. So, it also has 7 core features under this model. One of the features is individuals are not permitted to live with a parent, grandparent, or guardian. And the idea behind this is that the primary goal in this is for the person to leave the nest and not necessarily take the nest with them. So individuals also under these core features can choose to participate how they choose how they'll participate within their communities. They can live in the same type of housing as a person without a disability. Housing is affordable, and individuals will typically pay no more than 30% of their income towards rent. Housing is accessible and leased by the individual, so the individual is the primary leaseholder. They're not subleasing or anything of that nature. They're the primary leaseholder. And that's why there's a requirement that the individual be 18 years of age or older when talking about independent housing in this sense. Also, a huge thing is housing is not contingent upon participation in services and vice versa. So individuals don't have to move if they decide to change their service provider, or if they decide to move, they can keep the same service providers for their home, for their new home. The services are not coupled with the actual setting. And this model is different from other settings such as group homes and sponsored residential because it provides more flexibility for individuals to manage their own money. In congregate settings such as group homes and sponsored residential programs, individuals often have to follow program rules in order to remain in that setting. In independent housing, individuals have that control. They maintain the control of their home environment and also who provides in-home support. With moving towards independent housing, of course, there are a number of preparations as well as decisions that have to be made in order to ensure as much of a seamless transition as possible. One of the first steps in planning and preparing for the move to independent living is really to learn about what it's like to live in independent housing and different options that are available. These options may be explored by reviewing tools and participating in independent housing activities, such as watching the videos created by our Northern Virginia Housing Coordinator and her regional team. So these videos that are being shown on the screen, as the links are shown on the screen, are videos that give you an opportunity to actually meet individuals who have transitioned into independent living, and you get a sense to learn about the stories that they share and their experiences. And for the sake of time, we won't watch any of these videos. However, the presentation will be provided to you after the webinar so that you can have access to view the links at a later time. Another tool we developed is called Live My Own Home Handbook. And this is a guide that helps individuals understand and think through things when planning to move to independent housing. It also provides detailed explanations about housing resources and affordable housing programs, as well as step-by-step instructions to assist with developing a budget, applying for housing, and completing the housing search to identify a rental unit. To get an even closer look at independent housing, someone may choose to visit people who are already living independently with supports and learn directly from them. Sometimes this is the best resource for people to actually see someone who is in their own environment, that they're living successfully and they're able to manage living independently, and just being able to see that example helps a lot of people to be able to move towards this type of independent living. Another option is to try it out. If someone isn't sure that they're ready to live independently, a great way to find that answer is to try it out with living with the support for like an overnight or a weekend. So next, will be preparing important housing eligibility documents. I can't stress enough how a lot of people get caught on this piece because when it comes time to move forward with housing, they don't have the documents that they need. Once the housing options have been explored, it's time to prepare for actually applying for the rental assistance, but you may not have documents or you may not have the things you need to move forward. So, if, for instance, you need rental assistance, or in order to apply for a rental property or rental assistance, certain documents are needed. So, the items here are usually what's being asked for: birth certificate or proof of citizenship, a social security card, a photo ID, SSI and SSDI award letters, and receipts for medical expenses that were paid for by the individual out of their own pocket. And the reason that we say receipts that were paid for the individual out of their own pocket, because a lot of times if you're applying for rental assistance through, say, for instance, a housing authority, they will factor in medical expenses that the individual may have to kind of help offset the cost of their rent. Often these documents are easy to get together because there's a family member or guardian or support provider that has already collected them. But in the case that someone doesn't have one or more of these items, they can always apply for them to be reissued. Sometimes there may be a waiting period of several weeks between the time somebody applies and when they receive them. That's also another reason, if you're missing one of these items, that you want to apply for it ahead of time before you start like submitting housing applications and things of that nature. Failure to provide these documents could prevent the housing authority from being able to process an application or to approve someone for a housing unit or housing assistance, because without these documents, agencies in general cannot provide assistance to you, or even someone you're supporting could miss getting the rental assistance that they're interested in. So documentation is very important. So now that you want to live independently, the next question is it affordable? The key to learning whether you or someone can afford independent living is to develop a budget. I cannot stress this enough. A budget will show you your household spending, and if you don't yet, some people still live at home, so they may not have a budget, so it's a good thing to know and to have, but you can access, there's a link on this slide that will be provided later, and you can access an example of a household spending plan, and it'll have two columns, and one will show like your income and expenses of where you or someone you're assisting lives now, and then the second will show expenses for where you or someone you are assisting plan to live. So you can look at what your budget is now, and then you can kind of estimate where your budget will be if you're responsible for living independently. So those expenses that come along with it. And these columns may look very different. For example, as I mentioned before, if someone lives with their parents, they may not pay for electric or water or groceries or transportation. But when you live in your own place, you will have to pay for these things. So it's just a good idea to have a budget. And if you or someone your assistant isn't sure where their money is going, a lot of times we suggest a good way to find out where the money is going is to keep a diary of everything that has been spent for like the past 4 weeks. And this will show you where your money is going and kind of help identify areas where spending could be decreased to better afford living independently. I know a lot of times when Marie and I screen referrals, we're huge on the budget piece because people may have sufficient funds, but it just may be the way that they're currently using their funds. So in other words, things could be redistributed to add funds to other areas. So who do you want to live with? Once someone has decided that independent living is for them, the next step really is to consider who you or the person you're assisting wants to live with. Independent living does not mean that somebody has to live alone. Let me repeat that. Independent living does not mean that someone has to live alone. We want people to understand that in independent living, you can still choose to live alone, or you can choose to have a roommate or a living aid. If someone is interested in living with a roommate or living aid, they will have to try to figure out who that will be. But you can certainly have someone live with you. It doesn't mean that you have to live alone. A good way, if you think that you want to have a roommate or a living mate, to identify people in your circle that you can ask to share housing, or identify people in the circle of someone you may be supporting so that they can share housing with that person. You can interview the individual you're interested in. It's good to know what the person expects when they're living with you, and what you expect from the person. So you interview the person about what they're interested in if they were to share housing with someone you support, or you allow them to interview you as well. And then we also have a link provided that may be used to develop interview questions. It says questions to ask potential housemates. So this can also be used as a tool. You could do a trial run, stay overnight at each other's homes, or go on vacation to get a better sense of what it may be like sharing a space with this person. You never know what it's like to live with someone until you actually live with them. So it may also help to make a roommate agreement, or companion agreement, or living aid agreement, which can outline each person's responsibilities, such as taking care of household chores and paying expenses. We also have templates available for developing these agreements that may be accessed by the links provided. After deciding whether you want to live alone or not, then you have to see how much rent you or someone you're assisting can afford. The next step is to figure out where you will live. When attempting to identify the community where you or someone you are assisting wants to live, it will help to consider if the community is near things that are important, such as family and friends, a job, or transportation. Also, is the community being explored? Is it safe and secure? Does it have good lighting and sidewalks? Is there a lot of crime in this area? These are all items to consider when choosing where to live. To learn more about the community, you can ask your friends or family who live near the area or in the area to talk about some of their experience in the neighborhood. You could talk to law enforcement about safety concerns. You could take a tour of the community to get an idea of the opportunities available for recreation, work, and dining. You can also visit the area during the morning, afternoon, and night to see the full picture of the neighborhood and its activities. I know a lot of times when people are searching for homes, they do that. They kind of see what it's like in the morning, they see what it's like in the afternoon and in the evening, so they'll know, they'll have a snapshot of what it is each time of day. Also, in this area, a lot of people always say, well, there are no good neighborhoods that are affordable. That's not necessarily so. It You may have a certain budget that you're working with. Yes, it's going to take maybe extra time and dedication and persistence to find something, but there are decent neighborhoods that are affordable to live in. But again, it may take extra work, but it's possible. It's not impossible to find something within your budget. Additional barriers which individuals are often confronted with are the upfront costs associated with moving, such as application fees, security deposits, moving costs, utility deposits, furniture, and household supplies. So these expenses are often overlooked when planning the transition to independent living, and can cause a delay or even stop the move-in process. So if you or somebody you're supporting is unsure of how much these costs may amount to, it will help to complete a moving expenses budget. As we talked about before, budgeting gives you a better picture of what you can expect. And there's a budgeting worksheet that can be also accessed on this slide. It's a link on this slide. And it'll give you a better understanding of upfront costs. Moving can be used to develop a safe to secure these items. Um, Another area to address that would benefit the person sooner rather than later is housing barriers. There are numerous housing barriers that may prevent you or someone you're assisting from being able to live independently by impacting eligibility to receive housing assistance needed to make rental property affordable, or they may stop a property owner from renting to someone. Common barriers include items as poor or no credit, not enough income to qualify to rent a property, unpaid bills, legal issues sometimes are huge, a prior eviction from a rental property. So if you or someone you are assisting know that these issues are likely to come up on the road to housing, the best course of action would be to make a plan to address them before these things hinder the housing search process. Now, these barriers, they're not impossible to break through, but it will take guidance, planning, coordination, persistence. It'll take resources. Oftentimes, it takes creativity as well. For instance, and I won't go into every single one of these for the sake of time, but let's talk about the first one. If you think a landlord might be concerned about an individual's credit or lack of rental history, you could consider offering a larger security deposit. Rule of thumb, security deposits shouldn't exceed 2 months rent. You could offer first and last month's rent up front. Maybe there's some resources that will assist the individual with um, you, uh, providing for first and last month's rent up front. So maybe they could find a subsidy or something that could assist with providing these expenses. You could also ask someone if they would be willing to co-sign on the lease. So again, I won't go into all of these for the sake of time, but if you have any questions about any one of these, we will have a time at the end to ask questions. So I will now turn the presentation over to Marie Fraticelli. She's going to discuss securing supports that are non-waiver, waiver, and natural supports. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'd like to kind of recap one of the first or second slides that, and Sheree, you don't have to go back. I just wanted to kind of reemphasize what we do and how we can help. And one of the things, the main thing we do is we provide a financial resource um, for individuals that are over the age of 18, have a DD waiver or are on the DD waiver wait list, that choose to not live with their parent, grandparent, or guardian, and are, able and interested to live independently. Um, I wanted to kind of emphasize that because, and they would not pay more than 30% of their income. So this was set up intentionally because many individuals that we serve in Virginia, and this is the case throughout the nation, are living off of very paltry wages, or have only SSI, which is, I think, currently like $780 a month. There's no way you could pay rent with just that amount. But this subsidy makes it so they only have to pay 1/3 of their income towards their rent. So it's really important to I really want to emphasize that to folks, because I don't know if everybody puts that together necessarily at the beginning of our presentations, and I wanted to kind of reemphasize that. So what I'm going to talk about now are securing supports for waiver and non-waiver folks. We are of the opinion that anybody could live independently as long as they have the right supports. And admittedly, that's probably one of the harder things to do, even above and beyond preparing. So the devil is in the details. Obviously, you have to consider the steps to take first, prior to, during, and after. And first, you have to consider any reasonable accommodations that need to be made by the landlord or the rental assistance program. For example, as Sheree mentioned, if there is a issue with credit, sometimes they can make it a reasonable accommodation because the person has a disability and doesn't have credit. Sometimes most of the time, however, reasonable accommodation is something like, oh, I don't know, making sure that that a modification can be made, or that a person can get a ground level unit because of their needs. So there's a lot of different ways we use this reasonable accommodation, and you have to really look at the person's needs that can be handled by the landlord or need to be addressed by the state rental assistance. Then we ask that you complete a rental assistance application. Those have to be handed in, they have to be completed and handed in to us at DBHDS through the support coordinator / case manager at your CSB. So for those people that are on the waiver wait list, you may not have a lot of interaction with your support coordinator from the CSB, but you actually do have a support coordinator of sorts. There is somebody on that team that their purpose is to make sure that your needs are being met when you call. So they're kind of an on and on call basis. So some people that are on the waiver wait list have active case management, some don't. But that person, whoever it might be, is the one that has to send in the rental application to us, the rental assistance application to us. We go ahead and vet it and make sure everything's right. Like Sheree said, the budget, make sure all the paper documentation's prepared, that the budget's prepared, and that there are supports in place for the individual. Then you need to go search properties that accept rental assistance. Now, this is actually not as hard as you might think. Most communities have places that accept rental assistance, and if they don't, sometimes you can actually find a private person that would be willing to take the rental assistance, and it's not something they had thought of doing previously. So it if there's somebody that has a house that you'd like, a little cottage, 2 bedrooms, and maybe they never thought of taking rental assistance, they might be willing to. Maybe you can talk to people that might have property that would be willing to rent and take the rental assistance. Naturally, visit apartments to see what's right. Filling out the apartment application, I must emphasize not to fill out the apartment application based on hoping that you're going to get rental assistance. Make sure you've got the rental assistance in place before you fill out the application. Or at least you're very well on your way to that, because for 2 reasons. One, you have to pay for an application. So that's money out of your pocket, unless you use flex funds, which can be used for that purpose. But additionally, you may find yourself applying and then signing a lease before you know it, and then find out that there's a snag on the state rental assistance vetting process, and that there might be something that's holding up your certificate. So yes, fill out applications, and yes, look, but just be aware. Also, sometimes landlords will ask for, like, oh, we'll hold this apartment for you if you give us $100 deposit. Again, I don't recommend that until you're going to have an SRAP certificate or a housing choice voucher in your hand. Making sure the landlord completes required paperwork to approve the unit. They have to work with the resource administrator, secure assistance for security deposits, utility deposits, and other upfront expenses. Again, somebody making only living off of SSI can't typically afford these things. So that's why flexible funding has been put in place to help them with these expenses. I will point out, if somebody has an ABLE account, we will ask that we're notified of that, and they can use their ABLE account money. That's another option, but we just want to make sure that you are aware of the fact that this all can add up quite a bit and pretty quickly. And we do have support. We do have financial resources for that. Review the lease to make sure it's fair. Really, really important. Unpack belongings, purchase some furniture and household supplies. Again, we can use for moving and for setting up household supplies. You can use flex funds. Flex funds is a $5,000 cap, lifetime cap. So you have to be thoughtful as to how you're going to use these funds and how much is is available to you for all of these things. You don't want to blow the entire wad on furniture and utility deposits if you need somebody to help you move things too and pay them. But most people get by. $5,000 is plenty for most people. Um, then change the address with the post office, change the address with doctors, pharmacies, and banks. This is really important for paying bills and getting medical attention. So make sure that all those things are current after the move. So areas of support, some people need as much as personal care. They need help bathing and dressing. Sometimes people need independent living tasks and activities, and health and safety is a big one. Does the individual take medication? How can we make sure that their medication is dispersed properly? We'll talk about this a little bit later, but we have a lot of um, all kinds of tricks and things to help with stuff like that. Types of support: total care, physical assistance, hand over hand assistance, physical prompts, cues, assistive technology, adaptive devices, and monitoring, observing. I'm going to say it's really exciting the time we live in now with all of the technology we have. For example, the medication administration. There are, devices that can be put in place that will they will alert somebody to the fact that somebody hadn't taken their medicine that day. So these are some things thank you, Sheree. These are some things that are really important to know. So it's not, you don't have to have a person physically do all of these tasks. It's really important to understand what the tasks are that need to be taken care of and how they're going to be taken care of. There are physical needs, sometimes medical needs, communication needs, sensory needs. They have come up with almost something electronic to handle and assist with all of these things. And it's getting better all the time. I mean, I've been working with the department for 4 years, and in the time I've worked here, it's just amazing some of the things they've come up with to help people live more independently. So that's something to definitely consider. Here's a sample of a schedule that you could use. And again, these are all tools that you can use. These are things you can think about during planning meetings. If somebody says they want to live independently and everybody just kind of gasps and holds their breath and says this is never going to happen, please consider that it can happen with some really thoughtful planning. And this is a perfect example, is if you go through a daily grid of what needs to be done at what time, and who's going to do that, and who's going to pay for that, and how's that going to happen, you can really kind of sort things out. I am going to say this right up front. Sheree mentioned that living alone, and I'm going to repeat what she said, doesn't mean, living independently doesn't mean living alone. So you can have, in many cases, a roommate. You can have a live-in aide. There are ways you can configure things so that a person is not living alone. I as a young person, tried living alone once, and even though my roommate at one point drove me crazy, living alone drove me crazier, and I did not like it. So that's something that can be taken into consideration. Do people like to be alone, or do they not prefer to be alone? And also, just so you know, I don't know of any Medicaid service that will pay somebody to sleep, a staff person to sleep. So even something as simple as I need somebody to be there for them at night, just in case, like I have my barking dog at night just in case I'm by myself. My husband's useless because his hearing isn't the greatest, so I have to hear for sounds and stuff. But the point being is that you have to make sure that what you're asking for is really truly needed. And if you feel like you still need somebody there at night for safety, then consider a roommate or a live-in aide. But the person is not going to get paid by Medicaid to sleep. If you find that there's an 8-hour sleep period and, you know, the person you're talking about sleeps really well, then think strongly about, do we really need support during that time? Or if we do, can it be something like a little monitoring screen or a sensor that can alert somebody that somebody's awake and walking around? They have those. So if an individual gets up in the middle of the night, you can have a sensor that turns on an Alexa and makes a phone call to you. You can have something as simple as that. And I'm not supporting any particular device, but there are lots of different devices you could use in that instance. Talking with your support coordinator and family about who can help with activities, going through all those activities, and these are waiver supports that are available, independent living supports, in-home supports, shared living, personal assistance, companion services, assistive technology. Now that can be paid for somebody that has a waiver, but if you don't have a waiver, flexible funds again will help with assistive technology. It'll buy that Ring doorbell for somebody who you know will open the door for anybody. Environmental modifications, again, could be paid for by flexible supports and or DD waivers. So if you need more than your waiver will pay for, flexible funds can be added to that. Electronic home-based monitoring, we've got it now in Virginia. And the one company that I know of is running all over the state, making contacts with people and trying to provide services to them. I hope we'll have more options too. I think they're doing a great job, but you know, the more the merrier. It's always good to have choices. Non-medical transport, we have that now too. Well, we don't have a provider yet, but we are working diligently on that service, and hopefully at some point we will have a provider. So talk with the support coordinator, service provider, family about who can help with activities if you move. Again, waivers, EPSDT, if the person is between the ages of 18 and 22, that provides services. Mental health support services, if the individual already has those or is eligible for those, consider those. Live-in aids is a reasonable accommodation and assisted housing. That's like something that has been utilized frequently as an exchange, having a 2-bedroom apartment and a live-in aid that can get free room and board in exchange for providing some minimal services to the individual. That's, you know, another option. Natural supports, you know, I like to say every single new thing that comes out makes my life easier in some way. I love to do my shopping ahead of time and then simply drive up and pick up my groceries. It's been, because I hate going to grocery stores. It can cause anxiety. Sometimes it can just cause too much spending and isn't thoughtful, the purchases. So having supports like that, electronic bill pay, these are things we use every day, and there's no reason why we can't start implementing it with folks we work with and folks that want to live independently. And then private paid supports. Please contact us for any kind of ideas, but you know, sometimes we've got families that will rent out an apartment to their child, and they will use those state rental assistance funds or housing choice voucher funds that they get for that rent and actually roll it over and pay for supports for their child. So it's a consideration for people that are in a position to do that. Make sure the person-centered plan reflects supports you need for independent housing. Again, 2 or 3 years out is not a bad idea to start looking at these things. Start figuring out what are some of the things that are really important to learn to be able to live more independently, and start working on those. And that's for people that are already living in a group home or a sponsored home or a family home. There's no reason why anybody couldn't start working towards independent housing if that's what they want. Just because you're living in a more restrictive setting doesn't mean you can't live in a more independent setting. The closing of the state training school showed us that So there's no reason why we can't do that for individuals living in sponsored or congregate group homes. If critical supports are not available and you're not ready to move into independent housing, don't ask your support coordinator to put in a referral. Make sure that you start working on supports and a plan. You know, having these resources is fantastic, but having these resources and being ill prepared could be disastrous. We've been very fortunate. I think we have had very few people that have um, you know, bombed out of independent living. I think for the most part, they've done fabulously, and that's because of the hard work and dedication of the support coordinators that are constantly looking for ways to help them. And if they run into a snag or can't figure something out, I know Sheree gets these calls every day. I get these calls every day. Please, can you come up with some kind of way we can help this person before things fall apart? Not to mention, there is another $5,000 pot of flexible funds, which is to prevent eviction. So if we have somebody that, say they found a stray cat and brought it into their apartment, and the cat decided to, you know, spray everything in the apartment, um, and the person gets an eviction notice, we can get flexible funds to help deep clean that apartment and prevent eviction if it's necessary. We are going to ask a plan be put in place so that doesn't happen again. But it is an option. It is something we have because we recognize too that this is new, and you know, some folks just don't always have the skills, or we didn't have the foresight to see what they needed prior to them moving out independently. So take all the time you need. Success stories, innovative family-driven housing arrangements. So this creative housing approach guidebook is fantastic. It's got all different kinds of ideas on how families can manage to assist their children with living independently. Not too long ago, I had a call from a case manager who was helping an individual look for an apartment with his mom, and his mom and he were having a hard time finding anything that was really suitable. And then all of a sudden, the case manager called me and said, you know, can I ask you a question? I said, what? And I said, mom's decided to move in with her daughter, her older daughter, because she's feeling like she needs some more support. And what she did is she moved out and in with her daughter and left her son in his family home. And he pays rent to her. And it worked out perfectly. And they said he didn't miss a beat because he was getting in-home supports already. He was doing everything he needed to do. He was comfortable in his home. He is now living independently though, and paying rent to his mom, who is using that to maintain the house that she doesn't live in anymore. So theoretically, I mean, he can, if he gets lifetime rights to the house, he could live there for the rest of his life. And that's just one of many options that families have tried, and that's worked for them. So these are two guys, and I like to tell you their stories. The first person is Josh. Josh lives in an apartment where he uses special admissions preference housing choice voucher. He has a housing choice voucher, and he has a developmental disability, and he receives individual and family supports waiver, and he had his apartment funded with environmental modifications to make it accessible. He has a sliding, he's got an automatic door that opens up to a ramp that he could get in and out of his apartment with. I'm gonna let Sheree chime in because this is somebody she knows personally. But Sheree, he lives alone, doesn't he? He receives
Yes, he
personal.
lives alone,
He
and he
lives alone.
also has someone that comes in, consumer directed personal assistant that comes
Mm,
in for a couple hours a day. But
mhm.
mainly, he has assistive technology that is heavily helps him to be able to.
Right.
I mean, he has a ramp that he can go out back to a van that he has, and his doors are retrofitted so that he can get in and out. And if you notice in the picture, he uses the devices on his wheelchair to communicate. It's actually pretty like cool that he can use the headpiece of his wheelchair to direct like his writing. I mean, he really has a lot of technology that's making it possible for him to be able to live independently.
Yeah, and he lives alone. And from
Yeah.
from what Sheree has told me, he likes to spend time in his community, and he's, kind of a celebrity. So people know him, and he has a really good life. And the only physical person that he needs to support him is the person, I would assume, that helps bathe him and get him out of bed and get him dressed, and then he's good to go. So it's pretty fantastic. The next person that we're going to talk about is Ryan. Ryan is on the wait list, so he doesn't even have a waiver yet. He lives in a privately owned condominium, and he receives state rental assistance, which is SRAP. And I want to say something about state rental assistance program. It was based very much on the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is formerly known as Section 8. Again, 30% of his income, 30% of Josh's income is all they pay towards rent. The state, in this case with SRAP, the state pays the rest. In the case with Housing Choice Voucher, the feds pay the rest. So the subsidy makes the rent affordable in the condominium. He needs someone to live in with him. So he has a live-in aid, which is really interesting. So Ryan needs a live-in aid, whereas Josh is like, nope, all I need is somebody to come in the mornings and the evenings and help me out a little bit. And this person helps provide fellowship and monitors his safety. This is Ryan we're talking about. And he received a reasonable accommodation for a live-in aid that was approved, and he gets a subsidy for a 2-bedroom unit, and the aide can live with him at no extra cost. So it's really, again, it's really contingent on the team making really good plans, figuring things out, um, not having an umbrella plan for everybody in your area that might fit everybody, but more figuring things out for each individual person, because everybody clearly has their own needs. And we have other success stories that can be found on our Creative Housing Guidebook, and that'll be in the PDF format of this slide presentation. And next steps, I think that's it.
Um, this slide here is if you want more information about our independent housing, you can contact one of us. We are the regional housing coordinators, but we have regional housing coordinators across the state that we all do the same thing, but just in different regions. And so, again, this information will be provided to you to reach out to us if you have any questions. And I believe our next thing is to go into questions and answers.
I don't know, Sheree. It says questions. I don't know if we've got answers, but we'll try.
I had a question. You mentioned an ABLE account, and I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, so ABLE accounts are available. I think it's the Virginia Department of Disabilities that can provide you information for that. But what they are is, there's 522 accounts for kids, or is it 552? Anyway, for kids preparing for college. An ABLE account is the equivalent of that, but those would be for kids that are not likely college bound, but are more, that have a disability and may need some kind of financial stability in their future. There's, it's a way that you can save money and it not affect their benefits.
Mhm.
It's not exactly like a what do you call it?
Trust
A
fund.
trust fund. Yeah, it's not exactly like a special needs trust fund. It has, you can keep putting money into it. You can pull money out, and it can be used for housing, which a special needs trust fund can't be used for housing, but ABLE accounts can. So I would, if you'd like some more information on that, contact Sheree or I, and we can get you the specifics of where you could get that information and how you could figure out how to do that.
Wonderful, thank you.
You're welcome.
Were there any other questions from the group?
I do have a question for you.
Sure.
I am wondering whether you have any sort of a document that we parents could present to potential landlords to convince them to consider accepting these vouchers. I've run up against a lot of negativity as I search my community for safe options for our son. Everything I'm finding that would accept a voucher is no place we feel comfortable putting him, and vice versa.
I would consider, we've talked about actually doing that, and I think it's a fantastic idea, and I think that's something we have on our annual plan to be working on. However, in addition to that, there are two things you need to consider. Not all, even if you find a place that is suitable or you think is suitable for your child, the rent may not be something that we can accommodate. For example, keep in mind that state rental assistance and housing choice vouchers will pay for the rent, but if you know, if the person needs, all they need is a 1-bedroom apartment and it's way above the fair market value, and it turns out this 1-bedroom apartment is like on a, you know, on the top of a penthouse or something like that, we can't pay for that.
Sure.
However, I would, if I were you, I get in touch with the housing coordinator in your area and find out about low-income housing tax credit properties, because even though a lot of low-income housing tax credit properties don't necessarily advertise that they take vouchers, but they do, or take state rental assistance, but they do. So you're going to want a list of all the low-income housing tax credit units in the area, and not overlook. I just was talking to somebody about this yesterday. Just because it says they are for elderly people, do not discount them, because typically it's elderly or disabled. And so some of these apartment complexes that say they're for the elderly are actually elderly or disabled. Some of them are not. So you got to find out if it's an and or an or. But I know a lot of folks now. Also consider, you know, your child, are they going to be happy in a place where most everybody is elderly? That's up to them.
Right.
But that's another option. So yeah, ask for a list of low-income housing tax credit properties, and you might be surprised some of the apartments units that are on that list.
Good point. Thank you.
Were there any other questions from the group? Going once, going twice.
My only other question would be, what does it really take to develop a credit history for these kids? Is that, you know, is that a credit card? Is that, what do you have to do to develop enough credit history that you can rent?
Anything that you would encourage any child of yours to do as they're preparing to head out into the world. So sometimes, yes, that's getting a really you know, small credit card in their name and paying it off over time.
Or if I could interject, Marie,
yeah,
too,
please.
like anything like a cell phone bill, like a lot of times people already have cell phones, so maybe just testing that, something where a small credit card or something can be controlled, maybe a secured Visa or something, but something where they can show that they're paying consistently. I think that the cell phone is a great idea, because you can't really run up a $2,000 cell phone, you may have, your bill per month is going to be a certain amount. So maybe something like that as far as getting someone started. If the individual has a vehicle or is responsible for driving, a gas card where the person is using maybe a gas credit card to fill up their tank. So that's again kind of controlled. You're not going to put $2,000 in your tank in one filling, but it could be like a gas card or something like that. So anything that can help in that respect. And also, I know a lot of times with people looking for, when they're applying for housing, and say, well, we don't have any references, and this, that, and the other. They may have not lived on their own before. If they're living in your home, if the individual is living in your home and they're paying you any kind of rent or anything, you can provide a reference for that person as a rental reference as well.
And we recommend also references don't have to necessarily be former landlords. It could be bosses, teachers, church members. It could be anybody in the community that this person knows that can, attest to their maturity and responsibility.
Does that answer your question?
I think so. I didn't think a cell phone qualified because my very typical son-in-law was just a guy who always paid cash for everything. And when they got married, he was told he had no credit history. Well, he'd had a cell phone and paid it every month. And so they actually had a hard time renting.
He probably had a prepaid, and that's the way a lot of people are going. That's a really good point, because they don't have contracts anymore as much as they used to. But that's a really good point. Another thing is getting a utility bill in their name. Sometimes, if your credit's established and everything, and you don't mind putting a utility bill in your child's name, that's another way to establish a line of credit. Particularly could help also with if they're going to move in the same community as you, they would have history with the utility company also for paying their bills. I mean, then you got to consider the hassle of putting it back in your name after they move out, but that's another thing that would help build their credit.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we can go ahead and wrap things up.
All righty. Thanks, everybody.
Right, thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. And everybody, please have a great afternoon.